I'm Biliana Cicin-Sain, co-chair and head of the Secretariat for the Global Forum on Oceans, Coasts, and Islands, and I'm also a professor at the University of Delaware, where I run the Gerard Mangone Center for Marine Policy. The global conference, the fourth global conference on oceans, coasts, and islands, has brought together 430 ocean leaders from 71 countries from around the world in Hanoi, Vietnam, to look at major issues in ocean policy at global, national, and regional levels. Especially, the Global Forum and the Global Conference has focused on what progress are we making or not making in terms of meeting the important ocean goals that have been established by the world's heads of state at the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002. These are really central goals that give us, guidance and targets and timetables to meet within a certain time period. And since its formation in 2001, the Global Forum has worked to be like a watchdog on the implementation of these global commitments. Are we making progress or not? Where are we making progress? What obstacles are we facing? What needs to be done to overcome these obstacles? What new financing or capacity is needed to achieve these goals? Now, what are these goals? There are a number of very tangible goals, but especially it's the application of the concept and practice of integrated coastal and ocean management and ecosystem-based management. What that means is that we can no longer look at the oceans like, in very separate ways, fisheries as one system and, coastal pollution as another issue and so on. These issues must be joined together. And we have to look at oceans and coasts and the linkages to upriver and freshwater issues like an integrated system. That's the only way that we will be able to both protect the environment as well as achieve sustainable livelihoods from ocean and coastal resources. So we are focusing attention on to what extent have countries implemented new policies like new integrated ocean policies and coastal policies and practices in their coastal areas, as well as in the ocean areas out to 200 miles offshore, the exclusive economic zones. And here we're finding that, in fact, we have achieved significant progress since 2002. We have around 40 nations, which account for about 75% of the world's exclusive economic zones, that have really created new institutions, new laws, new procedures for integrated oceans governance. We're also seeing progress on, nations coming together at the regional level in large marine ecosystems and in regional seas areas like the Mediterranean or the Caspian Sea, what have you, to coordinate their actions and create legal regimes for management of marine pollution, for management of marine protected areas, and so on. So we've seen, quite a bit of, very productive regional cooperation among nations. Now, the challenge that we have in this area of applying integrated coastal and ocean management, the next big challenge is to look at the rest of the ocean, which is about 64% of the ocean, which lies beyond national jurisdiction, the deeper ocean, where it's kind of like the Old West. There is very little policy and law that governs this area. We have the Wild West in the United States, the cowboys. We basically have different, we have marine transportation, we have fisheries, we have offshore oil and gas, we have bioprospecting for marine genetic resources and so on. And these activities are all conducted very separately without an overall environmental review, so that we're beginning to suffer significant losses in marine biodiversity in these areas. So, in the next phase, we'll have to really focus attention on the areas beyond national jurisdiction and assist countries in creating an appropriate legal and policy regime for these areas. Now, I should say that there are significant differences among nations on this, and that there's a rift generally between developed and developing nations, and the developing nations are especially interested in creating good forms of benefit sharing in terms of the exploitation of marine genetic resources, and they consider these to be the common heritage of mankind. Okay, now, so that's one set of issues. Then there are quite a few issues and global goals that feed into this big goal, and they relate to the protection of biodiversity, to restoring fisheries and preventing illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So there are several other kinds of topics that feed into the broad topic of integrated coastal and ocean management. The second major purpose of the conference is to look squarely at the issue of climate change. Climate change effects, we know now with a great deal of certainty that they are happening, they will happen, and they will threaten global security, human security, and ecosystem security. And now ocean and coastal peoples and ocean and coastal managers are at the forefront of the climate change effects. They will be felt first in the coastal zones. So, we can anticipate a situation where in many different regions of the world, we'll see a lot of human suffering, we'll see displacement of peoples, and we're not equipped as an international community to be dealing with these issues at present. For example, we will see a lot of environmental refugees, and we don't have good international law on these questions. At the conference, we're especially emphasizing that the international community needs to respond to what is being called the climate divide. And that means that the poorest people in the world will be affected most by the climate changes. And that, the climate changes have occurred as a result of the actions of the developed nations. So the international community as a whole bears, really responsibility for addressing these issues that will impact the poorest people in the world. So we are mobilizing our own community, the ocean and coastal leaders around the world, around this issue. Of course, a big emphasis in this climate area is also, figuring out practical modes of adaptation for coastal communities. And the Global Forum especially is working on this issue. Similarly, there are mitigation measures to, offset carbon that are expected to use the oceans, including carbon sequestration and storage in the oceans, and iron fertilization are two modes that are being discussed. Now, we have to say that, there are no established legal regimes for managing these. There are no established environmental review processes. So if we are even going to think about these issues, we have to first develop a detailed assessment and regulatory process to manage any such activity. I think in the future we'll also be seeing increasingly the use of the oceans for alternative energy, like wind energy, also use of currents and tides, ocean thermal energy conversion, and so on. So, we ought to be encouraging these developments and having, doing them right, if you will, having the appropriate policy frameworks in place to govern them in a wise manner, and of course to offset any adverse impacts.